The sun over Rose Creek beat down with a cruel vengeance, bleaching the red dust into something almost holy. The Founders' Day festival was in full swing, ribbons dancing in the wind, fiddle tunes slicing through the air, laughter rising like smoke from a fire. But none of that joy reached Mary Beth Calloway. She stood at the edge of the wooden platform outside the town hall, her breath shallow, arms at her sides, thick hands clenched into trembling fists. The crowd gathered not to celebrate, but to watch the sheriff finish what had started as a whisper and festered into a full-blown execution of pride. Sheriff Cole Madden, tall as a pine and just as unbending, stood before her with a crooked sneer. His silver badge glinted like a dagger in the light. "Mary Beth," he drawled, voice slow as molasses but sharp enough to draw blood. "The town council has voted. You're no longer welcome here." The words came like buckshot. Gasps flitted through the crowd like startled birds. Mary Beth didn't flinch. Not when Cole dropped her mother's brooch into the dust at her feet. Not when old Widow Granger turned away with a shake of her head. Not even when little Billy Tucker, barely 10 years old, laughed and called her a cow. "You gonna say anything?" Cole prodded. She looked at him, slow and deliberate, with eyes the color of burnt sugar and full of storm. "No," she said. She knelt in silence, lifted the brooch from the dirt, wiped it clean on the hem of her dress. Her fingers lingered on it for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she turned, skirt swishing like a banner in retreat, and walked through the crowd that parted with the unease of those watching a funeral procession. She heard them whisper words like lazy, too big, takes up too much. Not one hand reached for her. Not one mouth asked her to stay. Out beyond the town's edge, the sound of merriment faded. Her mule, Pickle, waited by the old fence post, already saddled with the few belongings she owned, clothes, needles, some torn fabric swatches, and a copy of Little Women she'd read cover to cover until the spine cracked. She mounted without grace but with firm resolve. The sun blistered her skin. Dust clung to the sweat on her brow. She didn't cry. Not when the church bell rang in cruel celebration behind her. Not when the bitter wind rose, catching the fabric of her dress like sails against a storm. She was born in Rose Creek, orphaned at 7 when the fire took her parents and half their dry goods store. Raised by Aunt Esther, who believed that a girl could be whatever she wanted, until sickness and sorrow made her whisper otherwise. Beth had survived on grit, calloused hands and thick skin, literally and otherwise. She was 12 when they first called her Big Beth. 14 when the boys started daring each other to dance with her for a joke. 16 when she caught 2 girls laughing behind her in church and heard the words barn-sized, like a slap across the soul. But she'd never begged for acceptance. Not once. She made her own dresses, stitched them from scraps with hands so skilled even the mayor's wife once asked her to sew a hem, though she later claimed she'd done it herself. Beth had a dream once, a small shop tucked between the saloon and the barber, filled with velvet, lace and her own name carved above the door. But dreams in Rose Creek came with caveats. You had to be the right shape, the right sound, the right kind of woman. She wasn't. And now she was gone. The plains opened wide before her, the horizon stretching into possibility and peril. The silence out here was not the cruel kind, it was patient, like the land was watching, waiting to see what she'd do. By sundown, her hands were blistered from the rains, her throat dry as cotton. She made camp by a scraggly patch of mesquite, built a small fire, and sat cross-legged while Pickle gnawed on grass nearby. She held the brooch close, let the metal warm in her palm. It was shaped like a magnolia. Her mother's favorite flower, though it never grew in this dust-choked land. The night deepened. Coyotes howled in the distance. She watched the firelight flicker and thought, not for the first time, about whether there was something truly wrong with her. Not just her size but the core of her, the parts people didn't see and judged anyway. A branch snapped. Beth froze, hand creeping to the small pistol in her satchel. Another snap, closer this time. Her heart pounded in her ears. She didn't shout. Didn't call for help. She rose silently, gun in hand, eyes scanning the darkness. Then she saw it. A rattlesnake coiled beside a rock, eyes gleaming in the firelight. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. One breath. One clean shot. The echo rolled across the flat land like thunder. The snake's body twitched once, then stilled. Beth sat down slowly, breath catching in her throat. From a hilltop beyond her firelight, a figure on horseback watched. A man with a wide-brimmed hat and a face half hidden in shadow. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just watched. Clayton Briggs had seen a lot of things in his life. Men break, horses die, towns rot from the inside. But he'd never seen a woman face a snake like that without blinking. He said nothing. Just turned his horse and rode back into the night. Beth never knew he'd been there. She poked at the fire until the flames danced higher, a soft light flickering in her tired eyes. "I won't cry for them," she whispered. "Not one damn tear." Then, because there was nothing else to do, she laid down beneath the stars, her head on a saddlebag, the gun close at hand, the brooch pressed tight against her chest. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind whispering across the plains like it was carrying secrets only the wild could know. And the land listened. By the second morning, Mary Beth's legs ached like she'd been trampled by a dozen stampedes. Her hands were raw, eyes sunburnt, and her mule was grumpier than ever. Pickle had no interest in heading anywhere but back toward town. Beth tugged the reins gently, not begging but bargaining. "Ain't no future behind us," she muttered. "You want apples again, we go forward." They crested a low rise and found the fence just before sunrise. Rusted barbed wire stretched in jagged lines, half buried in tumbleweed. Beyond it lay a battered ranch, part ghost town, part stubborn miracle. The main house stood with one side caved in, the barn listing like a drunkard, the corral empty. And still, smoke curled from a chimney. Beth squinted into the low light. Someone lived here. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she stepped forward, Pickle dragging behind. A shot rang out, not close but not far. A warning. She froze. Then raised one hand slowly and called out, her voice rough as gravel. "Ain't here to steal. Ain't here to beg. Just need water." Silence. Then, out of the haze, a figure emerged. He moved like a man who knew his land, boots silent, steps sure. Tall, sun-leathered, lean. His hat shadowed most of his face, but the jawline was cut from the same stone as the hills behind him. A rifle rested easy in his hand, not aimed but not idle. She didn't lower her hand. "Mary Beth Calloway. Most folks call me Big Beth. You can too if you're feeling cruel or lazy." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Clayton Briggs. That your bullet?" "Just the noise. The bullet's in a stump." "Fair enough." He looked her over like a rancher would a storm cloud, trying to figure if it'd bring rain or ruin. "You're far from town. They asked me to leave." Loudly. "Thought I'd listen." She saw his eyes flicker. Not pity. Appraisal. "You hurt." "Only in the places I can't stitch." He nodded once. "Got a pump by the barn. You're welcome to water. That mule looks about 5 minutes from Keeling." Beth followed, too proud to limp. By noon, she'd had her fill of well water, rinsed her face, and let Pickle drink until his ears twitched with pleasure. She was ready to move on when Briggs handed her a tin cup filled with coffee and gestured toward a tree stump like it was the finest chair in the house. "You any good with a hammer?" Beth arched a brow. "Better with a needle. Got fences to mend. Chickens to undam. If you're looking for work, I got it. Not charity. Not favors. Pays food and a roof." She took the cup, let the steam sting her lips. "You don't know me," she said. "I know the kind of person who walks the prairie alone and doesn't flinch at a warning shot." She nodded once. "Then I reckon I'll stay." The first week was fire and splinters. Beth pulled wire till her arms felt torn from the socket. She chased chickens with a fury that made Clayton chuckle from the porch. He was a man of few words, but each one landed like a nail in hard oak, solid, thoughtful, precise. She rebuilt the henhouse, stitched new curtains from feed sacks, and turned a half-rotten cart into a storage bin. Her hands bled nightly. Her muscles screamed. But she didn't complain, not once. And when the ranch hands, 3 rough-spoken men who'd tolerated Clayton's odd ways, made their jokes, Beth gave it right back. On the 4th night, when one of them, a wiry man named Jude, bet she couldn't ride the bull in the outer pen, Beth climbed over the fence barefoot and grinned like sin. 10 seconds, Jude said, spitting tobacco. "Make it 15, Beth fired back. The bull tossed her by 12, but she landed on her feet, dusted off, and bowed. Jude paid up without a word. Even Clayton cracked a smile. But it wasn't all laughs. The land was brutal. Coyotes took 2 hens. A spring wagon shattered an axle. Beth stitched up a calf with one hand while holding the lantern with the other. At night, her shoulders burned and her ribs ached, but there was something in her chest that had been missing for years, a low, steady thrum of belonging. One evening, under a sky bruised with dusk, Beth found herself alone in the barn. She stood staring at an old photograph nailed to a support beam. A young boy, maybe 12, holding a baby goat with a lopsided grin. The edges were curled, weathered. Clayton's voice came from the doorway, low and quiet. "That was my brother. Died before his voice even cracked." Beth didn't turn. "I had a brother too. Lasted 5 days. Buried him in a shoebox. She looked at her hands. I've stitched so many things, clothes, curtains, even saddle straps. Never fixed a person though. Not really. Clayton stepped beside her. Some people don't break clean. Can't just patch them up. She nodded. Sometimes I think I wasn't made to be loved. Not in the way others are. Silence swelled between them, heavy but not cruel. The next morning she found a new wooden workbench set up beside the barn. Tools she hadn't seen before, needles, fabrics, a spool of fine thread. No note, no speech. Just the gift. She ran her fingers along the smooth wood, eyes stinging. She didn't say thank you. Didn't have to. Trouble came 3 days later, riding on a crooked horse and carrying a shotgun like a second limb. Jed Crane, mouthful of rot and venom, led 3 men up the trail toward Dead Horse Hollow like they were coming for a funeral. Clayton was out by the fields. Beth stood on the porch, shotgun propped at her hip. She didn't blink when Crane tipped his hat. Afternoon, he said with the oily smile of a man who'd never earned a straight day's work. Didn't know you'd hired new help. Beth didn't return the smile. New help can shoot too. Crane's eyes slid over her frame, not with desire but disdain. Gutsy for a, he paused, cocking his head. For a woman your density. Beth didn't flinch. She just shifted the shotgun slightly. You want to finish that sentence, or do you want to keep all your teeth? Jude and the others appeared behind her, quiet but ready. Crane's smirk faltered. Tell your boss I'll be back. The land's not his to keep. Railroad's buying. And they don't care about squatters or sad cows. Tell him yourself, Beth said. And bring flowers for your grave. Crane spat near her boots and rode off, but not fast. He wasn't done. Later, Clayton sat at the table, hands clasped like he was praying to the wood grain. They want the land for track lines. He's right about the railroad. But wrong if he thinks I'll run. Beth set down a plate of stew. We don't run. He looked at her, and for the first time, something in his gaze cracked. You don't owe me this fight. She pulled a chair out, sat down. Maybe not. But I've never had land worth bleeding for. Never had a name worth keeping. Now I've got both. He said nothing. But he smiled just enough. That night the wind kicked up hard. Beth couldn't sleep. She walked the ranch, checked the fence lines, counted chickens, whispered to Pickle. She paused at the edge of the property, looked out toward Rose Creek, far beyond the hills. She thought of the people who'd cast her out, how small their world seemed now. Inside her, something shifted. Not anger. Not revenge. Just a quiet resolve. No one was going to take this from her. Not again. Back in the barn, she stitched a new banner for the fence gate. A small thing, scrap fabric sewn tight. 2 words, bold and steady. Ironheart Ranch. She stood in the doorway as dawn rose, her silhouette framed by amber light. The land had tested her. She wasn't done yet. The fire started at the edge of the eastern pasture, where the wind slid through the dry grass like a whispered curse. Beth smelled it before she saw it, an acrid coil of smoke that didn't belong in the late spring air. She dropped the feed sack where she stood and sprinted toward the ridge. The flames leapt like dancers drunk on madness, orange teeth devouring fence posts, paint-chipped rails, and wild scrub. Behind her, the barn bell clanged, Jude ringing the alarm. Chickens scattered, horses neighed in panic, and the earth itself seemed to tremble under the weight of it. Backsides lit too. Boone yelled, his voice hoarse as he galloped by on horseback, hat snatched by the wind. We're boxed in. Beth didn't freeze. She moved like the fire was chasing her shadow. She kicked open the water barrels, grabbed a shovel, and started slapping down embers before they kissed the barn walls. Her sleeves scorched. Her boots smoked. She didn't stop. Not when her hands blistered. Not when her lungs begged. She caught sight of Clayton hauling water by the troughs, soaked to the chest, face blackened with soot. He saw her too and nodded once. No words. Just grit. Crane? She shouted over the roar. He didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. This wasn't nature. This was a warning. Beth grit her teeth so hard her jaw ached. They wanted her to run. To leave the land charred and broken and head back to where the small-minded whispered her name like a curse. But this ranch had her blood in the dirt now, and blood made things sacred. Hours later, the fire died down with the stars rising like pale spectators overhead. They stood in the ash-streaked silence, the survivors of yet another test. Only half the fence remained. The shed was gone. One mare had bolted and not come back. Beth sat on an overturned bucket. Coughing smoke, fingers raw and blackened. They'll come again, Jude said quietly, crouching beside her. Beth looked toward the hills. Let them. They'll find something waiting. Clayton approached with a flask of creek water. He handed it to her without speaking. She drank deeply, then wiped her mouth with her sleeve. "I'm not just staying," she rasped. "I'm fighting." He crouched next to her, leaned in close so only she could hear. "I should have stopped them. Years ago. Crane's been circling like a buzzard since my father passed. You've got the land," she said. "And now they know it has fire in its bones." He looked at her hands, swollen and blackened. "You need to rest." "I'll rest when this place has roots deep enough they can't burn through." That night, sleep didn't come easy. Beth sat in the dark, lantern low, sewing stitches into torn saddlebags more for the motion than the need. Her fingers moved from muscle memory, but her mind flicked back to the first time she saw fire. That night the store burned, her parents inside. No one remembered it. No one but her. Clayton's footsteps crunched the gravel softly. "You always mend things at midnight?" he asked. "Only what matters." He leaned against the post. "They'll come with more than fire next time. Guns. Lawyers. Men paid not to feel." She nodded. "Let them come. I'm done folding." "You remind me of my mother," he said after a beat. Beth didn't respond. She wasn't sure if it was meant as a compliment. "She didn't talk much either," he added with a half smile. Beth raised an eyebrow. "Funny. You've got jokes after a fire?" "Only the good ones survive it," he said. She chuckled, just a breath of it, but it felt real. They worked side by side for the next 3 days, rebuilding what they could. Boone reinforced the barn's roof. Jude scavenged wood from abandoned fence lines. Beth patched gear and cooked meals hearty enough to make grown men cry. Her body ached like she'd swallowed rocks, but she moved with purpose. On the 4th morning, a letter arrived. No name, just "to the woman who thinks this land makes her brave." Inside, one line hand-scrawled in coal-black ink. "Next time we won't warn you." Beth stared at the words for a long time before she handed the note to Clayton. His jaw set hard. "They're scared." "Good," she said. Fear is a fine thing to serve cold. But something in her chest twisted. Not fear, something older. Something like the echo of rejection, the shadow of every door that had ever slammed in her face. Later that evening she sat on the porch steps, elbows on her knees, watching the moon claw its way above the pines. The land smelled of ash and sweat and possibility. Clayton joined her quietly, sitting just close enough their shoulders nearly touched. "Why did you come out here?" he asked. "Because there was nothing left back there." He waited, not pushing. "I got tired of being too much for them. Too loud. Too wide. Too stubborn. I thought maybe the prairie wouldn't mind." "It doesn't," he said. Beth looked over at him, really looked. "No," she said. "It doesn't." The quiet stretched between them, long and kind. He shifted, then asked, "You ever think about going back? Proving them wrong?" She shook her head. "That would mean I care what they think. I don't want to change their minds. I want to make sure they never get to change mine again." The next day she found a paintbrush and the leftover whitewash and walked to the front gate. The wind tugged at her dress, cool and certain. She repainted the sign, Ironheart Ranch, bolder, clearer. By afternoon, a rider came fast from Rose Creek, dust flying in thick clouds. A boy, barely 16, mouth dry and eyes wide. "Miss Calloway?" he asked. Beth stood square. "That's me. Mayor's calling a land claim. Says Dead Horse Hollow is under review for seizure." She felt the words like a weight, but she didn't flinch. "Then I guess I better dress for town." Clayton stepped up beside her, arms folded. "You don't have to go alone." "I do," she said. "They threw me out like trash. I'm gonna walk back in like thunder." She turned to the boy. "Tell the mayor I'm coming. And this time I've got more than just boots on my feet. I've got a name." She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. The land would keep her breath, her sweat, her fire. As she saddled Pickle, her eyes burned with something sharper than fear. Purpose. Rage. Pride. All wound into something solid. When she rode toward town, her back was straight, her hair braided tight, her mother's brooch pinned high on her chest like a badge of memory. No more fires from the shadows. Next time she'd bring her own. Beth rode into Rose Creek like a dust storm on legs, her duster coat billowing behind her, boots echoing against the boards of a town that had once spat her out like a bad taste. She didn't hide her face. Didn't dip her head. Her eyes were hard flint, shoulders squared, her revolver resting at her hip. Not for show, not for threat, but as truth. She didn't come to beg. She came to end things. The streets had gone quiet before she even reached the saloon. Eyes peeked through half-drawn curtains. Conversations dried up like water in July. Men who once laughed at her behind whiskey glasses now stepped back like they feared the weight of her shadow. Sheriff Cole Madden was waiting on the porch of the mayor's office, the brim of his hat pulled low, a fresh cigar smoldering between his teeth. He didn't greet her. He looked at her like she was something ancient that had clawed its way out of the ground. "Well," he said, voice flat. Hell done froze over. Beth stopped at the steps. "Guess you'll need warmer boots." She didn't wait for permission. She walked straight past him, shouldering open the doors to the town hall. Inside, the council was gathered, 5 men in waistcoats, their bellies full and their eyes narrow. At the head of the table sat Mayor Aldous Pritchard, skin thin as parchment and smile thinner still. He didn't rise. "Miss Calloway," he said, pretending at courtesy. "Didn't expect you back." "I never left," she replied. "I just found better ground." "We've heard rumors," Pritchard said, folding his hands, "that you've taken up illegal occupation of the Hollow, that you've been resisting rightful land development, that you've threatened." Beth slapped the deed down on the table like it was a gauntlet. Signed by Clayton Briggs' father. Stamped by the territorial office. Legal and binding. "This land doesn't belong to the railroad and it sure as hell doesn't belong to you." Pritchard blinked. "That land was left unattended. According to code. It was abandoned, not unclaimed," she snapped. "We built it back. With our hands. With our blood. You want to call it empty, then I suggest you come dig us up first." A slow hush filled the chamber. Even the sheriff looked away. Pritchard leaned back, his voice icy. "You're making enemies." Beth leaned forward, voice low, eyes steady. "I've had enemies my whole life. You think one more scares me?" A door creaked open at the back. Jed Crane stepped in, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. His coat was dusted in trail dirt, his boots still wet from morning dew, but the pistol on his belt was freshly cleaned. "Well, well," he drawled, tipping an imaginary hat. "The Queen of Cowland herself." Beth didn't look at him. "Come to add arson to your resume?" He smiled, all teeth. "You've got no proof of that." "I've got enough scars to testify." Crane moved closer, his hand inching toward his belt. "Maybe you should have stayed in the dirt where we put you." Beth's hand hovered just near her revolver, fingers relaxed. Clayton's voice cracked through the room like a thunderclap. "Step away from her, Jed." He stood at the entrance, dust in his hair, coat open, boots muddy. "No show. Just steel." Crane laughed. "This your girl now, Briggs?" "She's her own," Clayton said. "But if you lay a finger on her, I'll make sure you never hold a gun again." "Big words," Crane muttered. "Backed by a big rifle," Clayton replied, stepping forward. Sheriff Madden finally moved, hand raised. "Enough. We're not spilling blood on council floors. Pritchard, call this." The mayor stood, face pale. "You want to fight this in the courts, you can. But this meeting is over." Beth didn't move. "You've taken everything from people like me. Dignity. Safety. Hope. You pushed me out like I was the plague. And I still didn't break." Her voice rose now, filling the room like thunder. "You call me too much. Too loud. Too strong. But this world was built by people like me. The ones you underestimate. The ones who survive anyway." She stepped back, eyes sweeping over the council like a judge at reckoning. "We're not asking anymore. We're claiming." Then she turned and walked out, the silence behind her deeper than any gunshot. Outside, the sun had dropped behind the church steeple, casting long shadows across the square. People were gathering, quiet, hesitant, curious. Word had spread. Rose Creek loved gossip more than grain, and this was a tale they couldn't help but watch unfold. Beth faced them without apology. "I'm not coming back to stay," she said loud enough for all to hear. "I didn't come to ask forgiveness. I came to remind you that I never needed it." A hush. Then a voice from the crowd. "Beth." It was Lena Wright. Her voice trembled like her hands, but she stepped forward. "I was wrong," she said. "We all were." Beth didn't blink. "You laughed while they shoved me out." "I was scared of being next," Lena whispered. Beth nodded once. "I know." She didn't offer comfort. Just truth. "But I didn't break," she added. "And I'm not small enough to need your approval anymore." Lena stepped back. Others said nothing. But something in the way they looked at her had changed. Not love. Not redemption. Respect. Clayton fell into step beside her as they walked toward their horses. "You sure you're done here?" he asked. Beth paused, then looked back at the town that had once choked her. "I buried the last of it," she said. They rode out slow, wind brushing their faces, the sky bleeding fire and gold. The plains opened to them like a promise. Ironheart Ranch waited with fences still broken, roofs still patched, chickens still half-wild. But it was theirs. Beth stood on the porch that night, watching the stars take their place. Clayton joined her, holding out a cup of coffee. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They didn't need to. The land breathed beneath their feet. The fire was out, but the heat remained. Not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that forged. And deep in her chest, Beth knew this truth. She hadn't been cast out. She'd been set free. The world hadn't wanted her in its shape, so she made a new one. Ironheart wasn't just a name. It was who she had become.
The wheels screamed like tortured souls as the train shrieked into Bitter Ridge. Iron ground against iron, screeching across the barren silence of the frontier. Black smoke curled into a sky already bruised with storm clouds. The doors groaned open, and Annabelle Grace stepped out, one gloved hand clutching her carpet bag, the other gripping a folded letter that had once seemed like a lifeline. Her left boot sank slightly into the mud that had pooled along the platform, slick from the earlier rain. The moment she shifted her weight, the limp she'd worked so hard to hide betrayed her. Her hip hitched, subtle, but enough to catch eyes. One cowboy leaned against a post and snorted. Another whispered something to the man beside him, drawing a chuckle. Annabelle kept her chin high. She was used to stares. She'd collected them all her life like stray nails in the road. Shiny, sharp, and dangerous underfoot. But today was supposed to be different. She wore her finest dress, light blue with small cream flowers stitched around the hem. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat bun, and she'd even touched rouge to her cheeks before leaving Kansas. She'd reread the letter a dozen times on the train. I seek a wife of quiet virtue, loyalty, strength. Physical beauty matters less than moral character. Signed, Thomas McGree, rancher of Standing Means. He had sounded kind, thoughtful, maybe a little stiff but steady. That was all she'd wanted. A place to belong. A man who saw beyond the limp. Someone to build something with. The man waiting at the edge of the platform was tall, broad, and clean-shaven, dressed in a gray coat that probably cost more than her father's horse ever had. He had the kind of face you'd see on the cover of a dime novel. Angular jaw, proud nose, eyes that seemed to weigh every inch of a person like currency. "You Annabelle Grace?" he asked, voice dry as sand. "Yes," she said, extending a hand. He didn't take it. His eyes dropped to her side, tracking the slight tilt in her stance. "That your real walk?" he asked. She blinked. "Pardon, that limp." He spat to the side, his jaw tightening. "You didn't say nothing about being crippled." The breath caught in her throat. "I'm not. You are. Don't need a doctor to see it. And don't much appreciate being lied to." "I never lied," she whispered. "You said beauty didn't matter. That character." He cut her off with a bark of laughter. "Character don't build barns or carry water. I need a wife, not a liability." The words hit harder than the bitter wind that tore through the station. Around them, townsfolk watched like it was a show. One woman shook her head, muttering, "Poor thing." Another man whistled low, as if disappointed the spectacle wasn't bloodier. Annabelle's cheeks burned. "You asked for strength. I've survived worse than a man's bruised pride." "Not my pride that's bruised, sweetheart," he said, stepping back. "It's my judgment." He turned, whistled, and a black gelding trotted up the road. He mounted effortlessly. "Go back east. You don't belong out here." Then he was gone, dust and disdain trailing behind him. She stood motionless as the wind picked up, tugging at her dress like even the weather wanted her gone. Her carpet bag tipped from her fingers, landing in a muddy puddle. A man snickered near the saloon. Another muttered something crude about crippled whores and desperation. Her knees trembled, but she didn't fall. She'd done enough of that in her youth. Instead, she picked up the bag with trembling fingers, her gloves now stained, her boots splattered. The train had already started backing down the tracks. There was nowhere to go. She walked, slow and purposeful, down the rutted street. Each step a reminder. She had been unwanted before, but never so publicly, never so completely. Rain began again, soft at first, then heavy. Thunder growled in the distance. The town offered no shelter. Doors were closed. Curtains twitched. Even the dogs ignored her. She kept moving. Lightning split the sky as she reached the edge of Bitter Ridge. The muddy road turned to gravel, then rough dirt, carving through open land that stretched into the waiting wilderness. Her skirts were soaked to the hem, and the carpetbag had grown heavier with every step. Her right hand ached from the grip. Her left leg burned with each step, the ache in her hip now a deep throb. Just as she crested a shallow ridge, the sound of hoofbeats approached behind her, steady, not hurried. Not McGree. This rider moved differently. She turned slowly, rain dripping from her lashes. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop a few feet away. A dapple-gray mare snorted steam into the cool air. The man wore a long coat, dust-slicked and faded. His hat was tilted forward, hiding most of his face. But when he looked up, his eyes were the kind that made silence seem sacred, warm, steady, and filled with something she hadn't seen all day. Concern. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, voice low but strong. "I'm fine," she lied. "You're soaked, bleeding from your knuckles. Limp in bad." That's a mighty specific version of fine you got there. She didn't answer. What could she say? That she'd crossed half the country on a promise and been tossed aside like spoiled meat? That her last chance had just ridden off without looking back? He tilted his head, clearly not in any hurry. "You got anywhere to be?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "No family waiting? No room at the inn?" She shook her head. He swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion. The mare stayed still, like she knew her rider well. "My name's Levi Callahan," he said, holding the reins loosely. "Ain't a preacher, ain't a doctor, and sure as hell ain't looking for a wife. But I've got a dry cabin 3 miles west. Fire's lit. Coffee's hot. You can ride or walk, but I don't recommend the latter." Annabelle hesitated. Everything in her had been trained to distrust kindness, especially from strange men on strange roads. But the way he stood, hands relaxed, no smirk on his face, just a quiet patience, told her this was different. She stared at the horizon behind him. Open land. No safety. No tracks. Just more emptiness. Then she looked back into those eyes. "I don't take charity," she said. He gave the smallest smile. "Good. Ain't offering any. Just sharing what I've got." She didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, howling low like something ancient and hungry. Her fingers clenched the handle of the bag tighter. Levi stepped closer and extended a hand. "Miss Grace," he said, like her name was something sacred. "You've got mud on your boots, fire in your eyes, and the kind of strength most men couldn't carry. Now, you coming with me?" Something in her cracked, then held. She reached out, hand trembling, and let him take her carpetbag. He swung it onto the back of his saddle, then offered his hand again to help her mount. She placed her foot in the stirrup, hoisted herself with effort. It wasn't elegant, but it was enough. They rode together into the gathering dark, silence stretching between them like a warm quilt. Behind them, Bitter Ridge faded into rain, and somewhere deep in her chest, Annabelle Grace began to breathe again. The trail curled through scraggly pines and wild grass, the storm fading into mist as Levi led her horse with quiet care. Annabelle's fingers clutched the saddle horn, her boots soggy, her bones humming from cold and exhaustion. But the silence between them was gentle, not the brittle kind that came before cruelty. She watched him from behind, his broad back, the way his coat moved with each step. He looked like he belonged to the land, carved from it, not trying to dominate it. They reached the cabin as twilight melted into true dark. Nestled in a hollow near a creek, it was modest, logs darkened by age, a stone chimney puffing thin smoke, and a porch sagging at one end. It looked like the kind of place that had seen storms and laughter in equal measure. Levi tied the mare, then turned to help her down. She hesitated again, still enused to kindness that came without a price. He didn't push, just waited hand out. This time, she took it without hesitation. Inside, the cabin was warm with the scent of burning cedar and something savory simmering in a pot. A single oil lamp cast golden shadows along rough-hewn walls. A rifle hung by the door. A tattered book sat on the mantel. It was sparse but clean. Lived in, not lonely. "Sit," Levi said, gesturing to a chair near the hearth. I'll fetch dry clothes. They'll be too big, but better than walking pneumonia. She nodded, peeled off her soaked gloves, and moved toward the fire. Heat crawled up her legs like a memory, chasing out the cold. The chair creaked beneath her as she sank into it. Her body was tired, her pride bruised and raw, but she was breathing. That alone felt like a miracle. He returned with folded flannel and trousers. Left them on a wooden trunk near the back room. There's a screen in the corner, he said. Privacy ain't luxury out here, but I can make myself scarce if it helps. I've dressed in train yards, she said quietly. A cabin's an upgrade. She changed behind the screen, flinching as the sodden dress peeled from her skin. Her limp was worse now, muscles stiffening from the cold. She pulled on the flannel shirt, which hung loose around her waist, and cinched the pants with a bit of twine. When she emerged, Levi didn't so much as glance. He simply offered her a steaming mug. Coffee, he said. It's strong. Might put hair on your chest. She took it with both hands. I'll risk it. For a while, they sat in silence. Rain tapped against the windows like restless fingers. The fire snapped and shifted. Annabelle sipped the bitter drink and let it warm the hollow space in her chest. You didn't ask why I was on that platform, she said. Nope. You don't want to know? He glanced over, eyes unreadable. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. Something in her tightened, then loosened. My name's Annabelle Grace. I was promised in marriage to a man named Thomas McGree. We corresponded. He seemed, she hesitated, decent. I thought maybe out here folks wouldn't judge me the way they did back east. What did they judge you for? He asked, not unkindly. She gave a bitter smile. For limping, for not being proper, for refusing to stay quiet when silence was easier. He leaned back in his chair, mug resting on his knee. Folks out here ain't much better, he said. But land like this, it don't care if you walk crooked or cuss too loud. Just cares if you get back up when it kicks you down. She stared into the fire. I didn't expect it to hurt like that, being left in front of strangers like garbage. You weren't garbage, he said. He just didn't see past his own damn reflection. She swallowed hard, lips trembling. You don't even know me. I know what pain looks like when it's packed neat and carried quiet. That silenced her. The air between them settled, heavier but not suffocating. Just full of truths neither had spoken before. She looked around, letting herself notice things. How his boots were well-worn but clean, how the cabin had small signs of care. A quilt folded neatly, a chipped mug patched with resin. The book on the mantel, The Last of the Mohicans. Who do you read for? She asked. He followed her gaze. Myself. Words help when the whiskey don't. You're not what I expected from a man out here. And what did you expect? Rough hands, sharper tongue. He shrugged. Got both. I just don't use them on women running from pain. Her throat tightened again. You got family back east? He asked. She shook her head. My father died in a mill accident when I was 10. My mother remarried a preacher who said I was a burden. Too much sin in my blood. I limped because of the Lord's punishment, he said. You start to believe it after a while. Levi's brow furrowed. That's horse rot. God ain't in the business of crippling little girls. I know that now, she said. Took me a while. The firelight danced across her face, warming her cheeks, making her look softer than she felt. He watched her quietly for a beat, then stood. Eat, he said, lifting the lid off a cast-iron pot. The smell of rabbit stew filled the room. He ladled it into 2 bowls, set them on the table. Then rest. Tomorrow's another fight, whether you asked for one or not. She smiled at that. You always talk like you're narrating a sermon. Only when the audience looks like they could use savant. They ate without much talk. The stew was salty and thick, and she could taste the care in it. Someone who cooked because it needed doing, not to impress. By the time her bowl was empty, she felt full for the first time in days. Levi cleaned the bowls and poured water from a pitcher into a tin basin. You can take the bed, he said. I'll sleep near the fire. I can't take your bed, she said, rising. He held up a hand. I've slept colder places. Their eyes met. Hers searching, his steady. She nodded. Before turning in, she hesitated. Why'd you help me? He paused at the fireplace, poking a log. You were standing alone in a storm with nowhere to go. I've been there. It ain't right. leaving someone in the dark just because they don't fit the picture. She moved toward the bed slowly, leg aching with every step. The room was simple, a shelf with a candle, a blanket folded at the foot. She sat on the edge, fingers curled into the fabric. As she lay down, the mattress creaked under her, but it was soft. Safe. She turned to the wall, listening to the rustle of Levi settling into his own blanket by the hearth. The fire crackled. Rain whispered on the roof. Somewhere out in the trees, a coyote howled. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they were not from fear or shame. Just as sleep began to pull her under, she heard his voice, low and quiet. "You ain't broken, Annabelle. Just been a little from carrying too much." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. She smiled into the dark, let the warmth sink into her bones, and dreamed of things she'd never let herself hope for. Outside, the storm finally passed, and in the morning, the sun would rise on something new. The morning came with gold-streaked clouds and the faint scent of rain still clinging to the grass. Annabelle stepped out onto the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, Levi's mug of bitter coffee warming her hands. She watched as he chopped wood near the tree line, axe rising and falling with practiced rhythm. His shirt clung to his back, damp with effort, and his expression was carved from quiet focus. She still limped. That hadn't changed, but something inside her had. She'd slept through the night, deep and dreamless, the kind of rest she hadn't known since childhood. And when she opened her eyes to sunlight and the sound of a man humming tunelessly as he stoked the fire, she had to remind herself it wasn't a dream. Levi looked up from the woodpile and gave her a small nod. That was how it was with him, words reserved for when they mattered. That afternoon, while tending to the small garden beside the cabin, Annabelle noticed something odd. Hoofprints. Fresh ones. More than one horse. She turned slowly, gaze sweeping the trees, but saw nothing. Her stomach coiled tight. When Levi returned from checking the traps near the ridge, she told him. He looked at the tracks, then at the trees. His jaw tensed. "These ain't mine." She swallowed. "You think it's McGree?" Levi didn't answer right away. He crouched down, fingers brushing the earth. "He's got a reputation," he said finally. "Not for being mean, for being proud. The kind that don't like to be embarrassed in public." "I humiliated him," she whispered. "You survived him," Levi corrected. That night, Levi didn't sleep. He sat near the window with his rifle across his knees. Annabelle offered to keep watch, but he just shook his head. "Sleep, Annabelle. If trouble comes, you'll know it." She lay in bed listening to the fire crackle, her heart drumming a slow rhythm of dread. The first gunshot came just before dawn. It shattered the silence like glass. Levi was on his feet before the echo faded, dragging the table down for cover. "Stay down," he shouted. Another shot punched through the window frame, splinters flying. Annabelle hit the floor, crawling toward the hearth. Levi fired back. One clean shot that silenced the air for a heartbeat. 3 more horses circled the cabin. She could hear their hooves thudding against the dirt, shouts in the distance. Levi moved like a man who'd seen war. Calm, precise. No panic in his eyes, only calculation. "Back door," he said. "We slip out, circle to the tree line. They'll see us," she said, heart hammering. "Only if they're looking the right way." He handed her a pistol. It felt too heavy, too cold. "I've never fired one," she admitted. "Point and squeeze. Loud's all that matters." They ducked low, crept through the back. The cabin groaned under weight and age, every step threatening to betray them. As they slipped into the trees, Levi glanced back once, jaw tight. He didn't want to leave the place, but survival came first. They crawled along a ridge, leaves damp under their palms. The gunmen had stopped shooting, searching now, circling like wolves. From their hiding place, Annabelle could see one rider dismount and creep toward the cabin with a torch in hand. The fire caught fast. Levi muttered a curse under his breath. "Why burn it?" she whispered. "To send a message," he replied, "or to punish what they can't control." The flames consumed the cabin quickly, throwing light across the clearing. Shadows danced wildly. One of the men stood too close to the fire. Levi took the shot. He dropped. The others scattered, returning fire. Down! Levi shouted, pulling her close behind the ridge. Bullets cracked through the branches above. Annabelle pressed her body into the earth, dirt in her teeth, heart racing. I can't lose you, she said, voice barely audible over the noise. You won't, Levi said. But if I do fall, you run. You run fast and hard, and don't look back. She shook her head violently. I'm not running again. The standoff didn't last long. The attackers hadn't come expecting resistance, let alone a man with a rifle and a woman willing to stand beside him. When another of their number fell with a scream, the remaining two turned and rode off into the trees, firing wild shots as they fled. Silence returned slowly, filled with smoke and the scent of burned wood. Levi rose, breathing hard. You all right? She nodded. Her hands trembled, but she was still on her feet. The cabin was gone. Nothing but charred beams and smoke rising against a pale sky. She stared at it for a long time. The place that had felt like the start of something. It was now just another scar. But Levi was alive. And she was too. They'd buried the men near the creek. Didn't speak much while doing it. Just worked with tired hands and hollow silence. By noon, they found shelter in a hunter's cave Levi knew from years ago. Dry, tucked into a cliffside, with a flat stone ledge they could sleep on. He built a small fire. She sat across from him, watching the shadows crawl across his face. He leaned forward finally, elbows on his knees. I was a soldier once, he said. Thought I was doing good. One raid. We were supposed to clear a camp. Only when we got there, it wasn't soldiers. Just families. Kids. Her breath caught. One girl got caught in the fire. I went in after her. Pulled her out. That's how I got this. He touched the scar on his cheek. My commander told me I disobeyed orders. Said the burn was my punishment. Got discharged with nothing but that. Annabelle didn't speak. Just watched him with eyes that saw everything now. His silence, his solitude. The way he gave without expecting anything in return. You think we're just bent, she said quietly. But maybe we're just proof that the world doesn't break what's already brave. He looked at her then, eyes warm. Tired. Honest. Maybe, he said. She reached in her coat and pulled out the ruined letter. The ink had bled in the rain. McGree's name smudged to obscurity. I came out here thinking someone would save me, she whispered. Now I know I had to save myself first. You did, he said. But if you don't mind someone walking beside you while you do it, I reckon I'd be proud to be that man. She blinked at him, breath caught. I ain't got much left, he said, voice soft now. But I've got my hands, my name, and what's left of this heart. If you'll have me, Annabelle Grace, I'd be honored to make a new life with you. She stared at him, his soot-streaked shirt, his tired smile, the steady truth in his eyes. There was no ring, no ceremony, no flowers. But there was love, the kind that didn't need pretty words or polished promises. She leaned forward, took his hand in both of hers. You're not what I expected when I came west, she said. You're better. The cave was quiet except for the fire crackling between them, and the soft sound of two people choosing each other in a world that had tried so hard to make them believe they never could. Bitter Ridge stirred slow after sunrise, dust curling through its narrow streets like old regrets. Word had spread like wildfire on dry brush. McGree's hired men were dead. The cabin had burned, and the girl he'd rejected, the one with the limp, hadn't disappeared. She'd survived. Worse yet, she'd stayed. Annabelle stood just outside the sheriff's office, chin high, heart steady. Her boots were dust-worn, her dress simple but clean, and her eyes were lit with the kind of fire that didn't burn out. It burned through. Levi stood beside her, arms crossed, broad shoulders casting long shadows. He hadn't shaved in days, and the bruises on his temple were still visible, but his presence was thunderous. Sheriff Dumley stepped out, gray-bearded and bone-weary, the kind of man who'd seen too many years and not enough justice. You got witnesses? He asked, tipping his hat toward them. Levi nodded once. We buried 2 of his men ourselves. They came armed and lit a match to my home. I saw the smoke, the sheriff admitted. Didn't think it was your place until I heard talk. McGree's been whispering about you 2 for days. Said you were trespassing. Said you'd lured his wife-to-be into something sinful. Annabelle stepped forward, voice steady as a bell. He rejected me in public, left me on the platform like I was nothing. He forfeited his claim to any opinion the moment he turned his back. True enough, Dunley said, scratching his beard. Still, he's a man of influence. Can't lock him up without proof. Proof? Levi echoed. I've got scorched earth and bullet holes. And I've got the scars on my hands, Annabelle added, lifting her palm, where a fresh burn had just begun to scab. Dunley looked between them, then let out a long, hard sigh. Fine, you give me one more witness. Just one. Someone in this town who'll speak against McGree, and I'll see he faces trial. They left the office and walked in silence. Later that afternoon, as the sun lowered toward the ridge, Levi leaned against the rail of the general store while Annabelle ducked inside. He watched the street like a hawk, waiting, always waiting. He knew the kind of men McGree hired. They didn't believe in consequences, just clean up. When Annabelle emerged, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a girl no older than 10, freckles across her nose, and one foot that dragged slightly behind the other. She stared up at Levi, wide-eyed. She saw it, Annabelle said softly. Saw McGree's men ride out after me the day they burned the cabin. She didn't tell anyone because she was scared. I ain't scared now, the girl said. You're the one who helped Ma when the doc wouldn't see her, remember? Ma said people like you, people who've been through fire, they don't run when things get hot. Levi knelt in front of the girl. You willing to say that in front of the sheriff? She nodded, all defiance and pride. By morning, McGree was in irons. The town watched as he was marched through the square, spitting and swearing, his fancy clothes stained with sweat. He turned to Annabelle as he passed and sneered. You'll regret this, cripple. She didn't flinch, just said I already did, the moment I believed you might be worth my time. The trial was short. The sheriff kept his word. With the girl's testimony and the evidence of the attack, McGree was stripped of land rights, fined, and sentenced to 6 months in a prison camp 2 counties west. For a man like him, it may as well have been death. Annabelle didn't smile when they took him away. She didn't need to. Justice wasn't about joy. It was about restoration. The town changed after that. People nodded to her now, spoke her name with respect. The same men who had once chuckled when she limped now tipped their hats. The saloon keeper offered her and Levi a plot of land behind the livery, free for a year if Levi helped rebuild the barn. They accepted. In a week, a small cabin stood where there had been nothing but weeds. It wasn't fancy, but it had 4 walls, a window, and a future. On the last Saturday of the month, under a cottonwood tree that reached for the sky like it was praying, Levi stood with Annabelle before a weathered preacher who smelled of pipe tobacco and Bible ink. She wore a dress the town women had sewn together from scraps of muslin and lace. It didn't shimmer, but it flowed when she walked, and Levi looked at her like she was the first and last good thing he'd ever seen. The preacher cleared his throat, adjusted his spectacles, and said, Now, I ain't one for long-winded sermons, and you two look like you've already been through enough fire to know how hot it gets. So I'll just ask, Levi Callahan, do you take this woman to be yours, come hail or high water? I do, Levi said, loud enough to make the wind pause. And Annabelle Grace, do you take this man, come dust or thunder? I do, she whispered, a smile blooming slow and bright. Well then, the preacher said, chuckling, by the power vested in me by the good folks of Bitter Ridge and the fact that you two are clearly too stubborn to die alone, I pronounce you husband and wife. Someone in the crowd let off a celebratory shotgun blast that scared the horses and knocked the preacher's hat clean off. Laughter followed. Wild West humor, rowdy and unfiltered. Levi kissed her gently, then fiercely. When they pulled apart, the crowd erupted in cheers, clapping and hollering like it was the 4th of July. Later that night, as the stars spread like silver dust across the sky, Annabelle stood on the porch of their new cabin, leaning into Levi's side. The cicadas hummed. The creek whispered. The past, those years of rejection, shame, and fear, seemed like shadows too weak to touch her now. Think we'll make it? She asked. Levi rested a hand on her waist. We already did. She leaned into him, her limp now just a part of her rhythm. not a curse. He didn't see it anymore. Neither did she. The door creaked open behind them, and the smell of stew drifted out. Her recipe this time. Something simple, warm, the kind of thing that told a man he was home. They went inside together, hand in hand, leaving the past outside where it belonged. And in the glow of that little cabin, beneath stars too many to count, Annabelle Grace Callahan finally understood. She hadn't been rescued. She'd risen. From ashes, from shame, from the words that once tried to define her. She had chosen love, chosen courage, chosen herself. And as the fire crackled and laughter curled around their walls, the story of the girl who was once rejected became legend in Bitter Ridge. The kind of legend folks told around fires when they wanted to remind themselves that even in the wildest places, love still finds a way. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.